Hello, how are you? Have you ever heard of microplastics? Many people, when we mention this term, think of those tiny plastic particles found in nature, in the oceans, and believe that this isn't really a problem for us as human beings. But actually, it is a problem. Recently, researchers have found extremely small plastic particles in the blood, lungs, placenta, intestines, testicles, and even in people's brains. These can have serious consequences for our health. In this video, I'm going to teach you more scientifically proven strategies for your diet and lifestyle that can help reduce your exposure to these microplastics, as well as decrease their absorption and promote their natural elimination from our bodies. You need to watch this video, stay until the end because you won't want to miss it. Before we start, I want to ask if you're interested in these topics. And what do you try to do to reduce the impact of all the plastic we have in our daily lives, which we end up consuming indirectly, and that affects our health? Write to me down below in the comments and leave your like on the video. This is really important to me. And share it with other people you know who care about their health, who you know will also be concerned and need this information. Let's expand this chain of kindness. Let's start by talking about what microplastics are and why, in fact, this really matters so much. Actually, first we have to understand something simple, right? That plastic, we already know this, but it's good to remember plastic doesn't disappear completely. It breaks down into smaller pieces. A plastic bottle that you use, that you bought water, soda, juice, it's not going to disappear over time. It will break down into smaller and smaller particles through exposure to heat, light, wear and tear, washing, friction, and repeated use. And the natural aging of the material causes this to happen continuously. And these microscopic fragments are called microplastics, as I mentioned to you. And as they get smaller and smaller, even becoming invisible to the naked eye, sometimes we look at a place and say, there's nothing here. But there are nanoplastics, which are starting to become one of the biggest concerns in modern science today. The smaller the particle, the greater, it seems, its ability to interact with the cells and tissues of our body, because extremely small particles can cross biological barriers in different ways. And this completely changes the issue of scientific concern nowadays. It's very important for us to talk about this. Currently, one of the things that most frightens scientific researchers is not just the issue of physical plastic. Many plastics also carry associated chemical compounds, such as BPA, BPS, BPF, phthalates. These substances can also be called endocrine disruptors in science because they are compounds capable of interfering with the hormonal communication in our body. We know that hormones act as chemical messengers, and some of these compounds can mimic or disrupt part of the signaling, which is carried out by the hormones in our bodies. That's why they have been studied in association with inflammation, metabolic changes, insulin resistance, hormonal imbalances, including in children, and neuroinflammation. This doesn't mean, just to reassure you, that a single contact with plastic will cause any disease in you. The greatest concern among researchers nowadays seems to be something else: the accumulated and silent exposure to these microplastics and nanoplastics over the decades. Because never before in human history have we had so much plastic, so many ultra-processed foods, so much food packaged in plastic, and so much thermal contact with plastic, which is also a very important issue to discuss. When we think scientifically, what would be the biggest problem then regarding plastics, right? What we could try to improve now, today, is the issue of the combination of heat and plastic. This is a combination that greatly increases the release of these particles and chemical compounds. And this is already very well documented scientifically, especially when high temperatures are involved, fat from food, and prolonged exposure time. That's why some of the most problematic habits nowadays are, for example, heating food in plastic containers in the microwave. Even containers that are considered microwave safe can become worn out when they are repeatedly exposed to very high heat. And the fat in food can further increase the migration of these chemical compounds into the food that you will actually consume. Another thing that has been concerning scientists is hot drinks in disposable cups, because some people think, oh, that cup I get from that fancy coffee shop is just paper. But it's not, which is why you can't put those cups in the recycling together with paper. You have to put them where the plastics go because they have several internal layers of plastic precisely so that when the hot liquid comes into contact, the cup can hold up, right? If it were, imagine a cup made of 100% paper. If you pour a drink in there, it would leak very quickly. So when very hot liquids come into contact with this surface, there can be a greater release of microscopic particles and this migration into the liquid as well. Another issue that concerns scientists is food delivery and plastic packaging. That's because the food leaves hot from whoever prepared it. It's put in that little container, that plastic lunchbox, it stays sealed, and often there's fat naturally from the food preparation, and it remains in contact with the plastic for quite a while, from the person who made it to the person who delivers it until it gets to your house. Sometimes it arrives lukewarm, and you reheat that container in the microwave, so that's a point of concern. Another thing that has been worrying scientists a lot lately is plastic cutting boards. For you to prepare, chop onions, cut meat, portion out everyday foods. When you cut repeatedly on that board, the knife naturally wears down the surface. You can see that it sometimes even takes on a whiter, different coloration. And recent studies have been investigating precisely the release of these microparticles into your food. Because you chop the onion there, but microscopically there's a bit of plastic in the onion. You put it in your food, saute it, and it's all mixed together. And there's also the issue of bottles exposed to excessive heat. For example, leaving a water bottle inside the car, in the trunk, on the back seat, or drinking from a bottle that has been exposed to the sun for a long time, at the beach, in a park. All of this accelerates the degradation of that plastic material, and it comes into contact with the food or drink that you are going to consume. Always keeping in mind that the problem isn't if it happens just once, but if you have these habits cumulatively and repeatedly. So let's talk about an issue that has been concerning scientists, the matter of microplastics and inflammation in the brain, chronic health problems, because some recent studies have already found microplastics in human brain tissue, and this has greatly increased scientific interest in this topic, obviously. Because the brain is extremely sensitive to inflammation, oxidative stress, hormonal changes, metabolic changes, and many researchers nowadays are investigating whether these microscopic particles may be contributing to microinflammation, cellular dysfunction, and increased oxidative stress in the brain. So, science is still investigating this direct causality, but the simple fact that these particles have already been found inside the human body, and especially in the brain, already changes a bit our fear, the concern regarding this problem, because we know that the body always tries to defend itself against structures it does not consider part of itself. And our body obviously has natural systems for neutralization, elimination, and cellular protection. So, in fact, lifestyle can make a difference, but are these plastics triggering greater inflammation in our bodies? Here remains the question that scientists are trying to answer. When we think about microplastic ingestion, of course, the first thing that comes to mind is ingestion through the mouth, through food, through drink, and when we think about all of this, we think about the intestine, because that's the organ through which nutrients and substances that are not nutrients and shouldn't be in contact with our bodies enter the bloodstream. In this same way, we can understand that the intestine is our main line of defense. And many microplastics seem to be eliminated, mainly through feces, because the intestine, the intestinal wall, works more or less like an intelligent filter. It constantly decides what enters the body and what should stay out, from what we ingest, from crossing over through the intestinal cells into the bloodstream. The problem is that this modern environment has been harming the intestine a lot, right? We know about intestinal permeability due to the excess of ultra-processed foods, alcohol, low-grade chronic inflammation, low fiber intake, and changes in the gut microbiota that can increase the vulnerability of this protection, which would naturally exist, right? Functioning well in our intestine. And it's exactly here that fibers seem to become very important when we talk about microplastics in the intestine, because the role of fibers, right, in eliminating microplastics seems to be very interesting. When we think about insoluble fibers from vegetables, legumes, seeds, and so on, they help increase stool bulk and speed up intestinal transit. And the contents remain in contact with the intestinal wall for less time, favoring fecal expulsion and reducing the absorption of microplastics. Regarding soluble fibers, psyllium, oats, legumes as well, chia, flaxseed, they form a kind of gel that can help reduce the prolonged contact of these particles and chemical compounds with the intestinal mucosa. So in addition, there's the fact that fibers are prebiotic. They feed the beneficial bacteria that produce butyrate, which helps maintain the integrity of the intestinal lining, prevents permeability, modulates inflammation, protects intestinal cells, and improves metabolic function. So making sure to include plenty of dietary fiber in a natural way can be an interesting strategy to protect your body from this excess of microplastics. There's also another compound that has been widely studied, which is sulforaphane, found in broccoli sprouts, cruciferous vegetables, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and cabbage. It activates a pathway called NRF2. This is an internal cellular protection switch that we have in our bodies. And when it is activated, the body increases the production of enzymes that boost antioxidant protection, neutralize toxic compounds, and enhance the body's natural liver detoxification systems. In fact, we always make this connection between the consumption of broccoli, cruciferous vegetables, and improved liver health. This doesn't mean that sulforaphane has the power to remove plastic from our bodies, but it helps the body cope better with this environmental pollution. So ideally, you should try to consume more of these foods in your daily life. Nowadays, there are many plastics labeled as BPA-free or without BPA, free of BPA. And many people think, so I can consume foods that come into contact with this product, even if I heat it in the microwave, and it won't be a problem for my health. The issue is that in many cases, it really doesn't contain BPA, but it contains similar compounds, like BPS and BPF, which I mentioned earlier. And these molecules have a very similar chemical structure. It's almost like swapping one thing for another in terms of the impact it would have on our bodies. So it's just for us to understand that just because it's written on that container, on that product, BPA-free doesn't automatically mean that it's free from any kind of substance with hormonal effects. So the most important thing when you think about food, a plastic plate or a plastic cup that you're going to buy to use, is the food I'm about to use going to be hot, acidic, or very high in fat? And is it going to stay in this container, plate, or cup for a long period of time? Those are the kinds of questions we need to think about before choosing the right material. And because many people buy these and heat up food in a plastic plate or a plastic cup to make tea or hot chocolate. So ideally, you should avoid heating any food in plastic containers whenever possible, as this helps minimize the risk of unwanted compounds leaching into the food. There's still another problem lately that we need to talk about, which isn't necessarily related to microplastics, but I think it fits well with this topic here, which is the so-called forever chemicals, the PFAS, because they can stay in contact with our bodies for a very long time. They're not necessarily plastics, but they can behave in a way that's very harmful to our bodies. Normally, these forever chemicals are commonly found in scratched, worn, or peeling nonstick cookware, grease-resistant food packaging, microwave popcorn bags, and even in waterproof fabrics and other water-resistant consumer products. So our body will try to neutralize this, right? The liver tries to neutralize these chemical compounds, eliminating part of them through the bile into the intestine. And again, those soluble, viscous fibers can help. They seem to help a lot with the fecal elimination of these compounds. But not all exposure comes from our food. That's something we also need to be aware of. Some microplastics enter our bodies through inhalation, and that's why we shouldn't get too stressed or overly neurotic, but we already know that synthetic clothing, carpets, polyester sofas can constantly release plastic microfibers. And part of this household dust nowadays already contains microscopic particles of microplastics or nanoplastics as well. In addition, sponges, utensils, and the wear and tear of plastic surfaces can contribute to this continuous exposure. So let's talk about practical things for everyday life. So we don't get too neurotic, right? Or become extremely stressed and anxious with all of this, but knowing what you can do to try to have at least a minimum amount of control. When it comes to microplastics, I think this middle ground is quite interesting. So reduce heating food and drinks in plastic as well, right? I don't know if you use plastic cups, plates, or containers, but try to avoid them. Don't heat food or drinks in plastic. Instead, use a ceramic mug or a glass container. And if you can, try to reduce the amount of plastic you use around the house or even get rid of it altogether. Avoid prolonged contact of food with plastic, especially when the food is hot, right? So even if you already have it, don't heat food in plastic. If the food is very hot, wait for it to cool down before putting it in a plastic container, for example, to store it in your fridge. Increasing your fiber intake will help improve your gut health. You saw that the gut plays a very important role. Eat the cruciferous vegetables I mentioned to you. Reducing the use of ultra-processed foods and foods packaged in plastic can help you, and in this way, using more foods that are sold or storing them at home in glass, stainless steel, or ceramic containers to make this process easier. Try to improve your body's metabolism by supporting these natural detoxification systems of the liver. Reducing chronic inflammation with antioxidants and naturally anti-inflammatory foods, which help to give our bodies that healthy and natural cleanse. The ideal material for us to cook with is high-quality stainless steel, pots, and everything else. But ceramic frying pans without PFAS or PTFE are also interesting options. And be careful with non-stick pans. They may seem really great, right? Very high-tech, you don't need to use as much oil to cook, but what's the cost of that in everyday life? So sometimes a ceramic or stainless steel pan might be a better option for you. So go ahead and tell me down below if you're also part of this movement to avoid plastic, if you have a lot of plastic, if you've been trying to switch to stainless steel, ceramic, or glass containers at home, if you've already stopped heating food in plastic containers, if you got interested and are going to start doing that. It's a change you can make gradually. Start throwing out your plastic containers, buy new ones little by little. You don't have to replace everything at once, all the pots and pans. But keep this in mind because as you learned here in the video, the problem is this cumulative use over many years. So maybe 1 month you replace some containers, the next month you swap out a pot, the following month you change a frying pan. Make this change little by little without overdoing it. And because of money, sometimes we just can't replace everything at once, right? Everything is expensive, but just having this idea in mind and making small changes over time can help you in the long run. Leave a like on the video, it helps me a lot. And share it with someone you think will enjoy it. Let's grow our chain of kindness. That's what I want on the channel. See you next time. Bye.